Dolores' storyline has gotten so freaking confusing on Westworld, and we are here to try and untangle it a little bit more for you guys. Full spoilers for Westworld if you aren't caught up through episode 9. And this is largely Ahmad and my understanding of what is going on Westworld, but we should say it is technically a theory. The show has not explicitly confirmed what is going on with Dolores, what is happening when and how and why. But again, this is largely our understanding of it. So I think up until, we actually talked about this last week, how it was confirmed that Dolores was living in multiple time periods, not timelines, as we said at the time. Not technically the same timeline, but different portions of it. And it was clear that she was having flashes between those different moments. Yeah. But again, what was happening when and how? What became pretty clear to me in episode 9 is that it wasn't just that Dolores was flashing back to earlier time periods and remembering them, she was actually reliving them. Like, she's been walking the same paths that she went on with William, but he hasn't actually been there. And that there are 3 main time periods that she has been reliving. And so we're going to try and break those down so that it does sort of clear up a little bit, at least as we're seeing this theory, which is all but confirmed. Yeah, what you're really looking at and what is going on when. So Ahmad, why don't you dig into the farthest back time period that we have been flashing back to?
So one of the earliest periods you see is when there's the small town, the white church town, or the church town, and you'll see the Westworld staff there, the Delos staff, training the hosts, showing the hosts how to dance, showing the hosts how to interact, and that's where we see Tallulah's character,
Riley's character
kind of mingling off from one of the dance partners and being a little confused. And you can tell this was probably prior to the park opening, where they said I believe there was 3 years before the park opened, and they were still working the bugs out. So you come to that town and you see everything's looking new, everything's bright new, there's people there, and that's probably the earliest period in the park history. So that's probably the starting point, and a different area, that because you will see this area later and it looks very different.
Yeah, and a couple of the key markers to indicate when this time period is taking place is, again, like Tallulah Riley's character, the host, Angela, who is the first person to meet William. That's when she is like very young looking and like doe-eyed and fresh as she's learning to dance. This is the same period that Teddy keeps flashing back to. It's when Dolores is in the full blue dress that we see in the flashbacks. And pretty importantly, the church is fully built. The town is, again,
not under sand.
Right, looking fresh and new, which we see happen twice in the show, but it's clear to understand the farthest back time period. This also seems to be the main time period where we see that young Robert Ford image of Anthony Hopkins that we've been seeing walking around.
And possibly when that photo was taken.
Right, I think it's around then because we see the host of his father that he's created, and also importantly, Arnold is still alive. We realize in this episode that those secret conversations that Dolores and Arnold were having were actually around this time period where he kept having
the church.
Yeah, he kept having her come, and that's why he's like, I'm so fascinated by your mind, because it's clear then that there's something a little bit different about Dolores. So the second time period that we've been seeing that we thought was a flashback, or maybe even at the beginning thought was the present, was when William and Logan come to the park. Now, this happens at some point after the events in the town with the white church, where, again, the hosts were still being figured out. This is actually at a point where it seems as though the park is on the verge of going bankrupt.
Yeah.
We find out because Logan and William keep talking about that. And this is, for some reason, Dolores ended up setting out on this path with William. We see her transition into her pants outfit that she wore for the back half of the season, but an interesting differentiation that we saw in this episode when Logan guts her shirt is cut in this time period, but not in the present storyline.
And Tallulah's in a different position in this period.
She is.
Where she's the host, the kind of front of the store, Westworld host. Here's your clothes, here's your gun, get your hat.
And during this time period as well, this is when the town is buried, when she and William in this flashback encounter the town, and it's completely, like, you can only see the steeple. The the town was like that for a good period of time. We actually found out a few episodes ago after Ford had visited it that he recently unearthed it. So in the present storyline, it's unearthed, but for a period of time, it was buried in the past, probably because a lot of bad things happened there. It seems like that shootout with Wyatt happened in this town.
And then there were also the discussions of the construction of the new place, and when you see the kind of Spanish villa-looking area, that's probably one of the periods where they were beginning to kind of raise it.
So I think that those timelines, probably if you were watching, were pretty clear that those were a little bit differentiated past a certain point. But the most confusing timeline to really understand, time period, I should say, not timeline, is what is happening in the present.
Yeah.
So Ahmad, do you want to dig into that a little bit?
So the present's always a little hard to distinguish in the show, especially because of the markers. A lot of times because of the incredibly deft editing, you will see certain characters appearing to interact with each other, but there are a lot of shots of Dolores where you see her and they cut to her shoulder, and where you could have sworn William was there a second ago, he's not there. That's usually a good marker when you see her and she appears to be alone. By the riverbank, when she's looking at the riverbank, there's a shot in the town where she's looking around and they're having kind of a Wyatt type of flashback, and she turns over her shoulder, and I believe William was very close to her. When she looks, he's kind of not there, and then he's kind of there in a different conversation. Usually, I think if Dolores is alone, that's most likely the present.
Right.
If you don't see anybody directly interacting with her for some part of the shot, that is a good indicator. And also the clothing, where she's got the pants, she's got the holster, and she's got the top.
It's not torn because Logan didn't just actually gun
her.
her.
Not torn, no dress, has a gun. Usually you're probably a pretty good shot you're in the present.
And it's interesting because once this multiple time frames theory became popular, it seemed as though we were seeing flashbacks of Dolores the whole time. But there were a couple key comments between other characters that give us a bigger clue about what happened. In this episode, Ford tells Bernard that trauma can sort of force these big revelations and memories to the surface. And at the end of the season premiere, it certainly looked like the Man in Black had raped or assaulted in some way Dolores. Now we don't know explicitly if that happened, but if he did attack her in some way, that could have been the instigating moment. And I think that's the implication, that that's the big instigator for her being set down this memory with William. And again, it's become evident that she has been retracing her steps of this key journey with William, where at that time her goal was to get to the center of the maze, to meet Arnold, to meet her maker. We keep hearing this repeated refrain, the maze isn't meant for you, said to the Man in Black, but the maze clearly is meant for a host. I think it's pretty clear at this point. What's interesting,
which is what you get a little bit out of the Arnold conversations with Dolores at the very beginning of the show, where he's kind of, you feel like he's trying to peel the layers around to kind of get to where they are in relation to this maze.
And it's interesting because in the last episode, we saw this flash of Dolores seeing herself lying dead in the river, and it was a little unclear what happened then. I think we'll find out in the next episode that in the past, in the second time period that we were talking about, when Logan, again, attacks, he attacks Dolores as a way to show William, you shouldn't care about this, she's just a machine.
There's guts.
Yeah, there's guts, but they're machine guts. I think we'll see her stumble and probably die in the river, so she never completed her journey to find Arnold and to get to the center of the maze. We see her in the present complete that, and she has this understanding that the reason why why Arnold can't give her any answers is because for some reason she killed him, which we still don't know too much about how that fits into things.
A little bit of a curveball.
But yeah, there are some other hints that that comments in previous episodes where these memories can be forced to the surface and hosts can confuse what is actually happening with what's playing out in the present. We saw that happen with Clem in the last episode, or with Maeve and the new Clementine in the last episode, as she acted out in reaction to a flashback, and that affecting her in the present.
And that's what makes a lot of this very hard to follow as far as where you are. And the show does that intentionally, but the show is very good at, first of all, the host experience past as the present. And something triggers a memory, they're going to live it as if it was a present experience. So if you're seeing it, if she's seeing a riverbed where that's going to trigger her memory of her being killed there or dying there, or she sees the barn house and like, oh, I was attacked there. And you do get the impression that the Man in Black was possibly trying to trigger a memory to kind of, do like a hard reset, like you would at the phone. Like, okay, this is how we get Dolores up to the present. All right, okay, and we're there. So there is an interesting mechanical manipulation that might be going on there as well, especially where the hosts are rebooted and kind of brought back to a current state.
And why he would be doing that and for what ends is a theory for another day that we don't have time to get into today. But I will say, I mean, this whole Dolores confusing mess of a storyline where she is a very unreliable narrator, that all might be very clear to you, or it might have been confusing the crap out of you. We sort of needed to work through it ourselves to really feel like we understand. But to me, if you're like, who cares? Yeah. If you're like, who cares? So what? To me, I think one of the most interesting things about this is that, you know, Eric and I had talked a few episodes ago about how the biggest issue we had with this Dolores flashback theory idea is that it seemed like it really undercut her journey. If we're only seeing stuff that's happening in the past with her, well, what about the growth that we see her going on? They're sort of having this loophole where she, even though it's a flashback, it's also happening in the present. But I think that because of that, she can retain that agency and that growth she's had, and that to me makes her that much more exciting a character. And as we get into the finale and find out what the heck is going to go on, that's
she could be
a
the
real
same
cool
person
moment.
in multiple parts of the timeline.
Right.
You know, she just, and as we saw with Bernard, hey, I've gotten to this point before, and I had a reset, and then I got to this point before, and she might be going through the same thing, where she may be getting just close to the beginning of the maze at different parts of her time.
And I think she's finally gotten to the center of the maze. That's, again, my
She's
understanding.
at the end of the road here.
That's my understanding of what we saw here. But we want to know, what do you think is happening with Dolores's storyline? Do you agree with our understanding of this narrative? Do you have a completely different take about it? And what do you think is going to happen with her in the season finale? Make sure to keep it here at IGN for all things Westworld.